Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. We are going to start a brand new series in which you will see what will happen if Naruto has some kind of scourge. So obviously we are going for the Lovecraft X Naruto crossover series. Well, this is going to be a small but a really good one. The author doesn't completed the story, but you will have a short fun for some short time. I'm sure you will like it. So this is going to be a single episode series. So tighten your belt and let's begin without any more delay. Naruto in this series will continue his lust for evolution, for power, and obviously for a better life form. So without any more delay, let's begin.
Char, Koprulu sector. The volcanic world of Char had its own beauty to it, if one would look past its desolate landscape and hostile natives. The constant volcanic eruptions would create the galaxy's most unique and beautiful shows of nature's power. The Overmind, however, chose this planet for its striking resemblance to its original home world, Xeris, located in the central part of the Milky Way. Aside from that, the natural defenses of the planet safeguarded the Zerg swarm from any Protoss incursion. With an inhospitable and uninhabitable environment such as the one on Char, only the Zerg would be able to survive. With thick exoskeletons, the nourishing creep, and the Zerg's unique ability to quickly adapt and evolve, Char would only harm outsiders while protecting the swarm. If any lesser being chose to inhabit the volcanic planet, they would surely die, but the Zerg were not inferior. The Zerg were not weak. The Zerg were superior to any other race in the galaxy, the Protoss be damned. The Overmind's children had the ability to adapt and overcome any adversary, any situation. The Overmind's children were the most biologically advanced beings. That singular stray thought made the Overmind, for once, stop all its actions, and it turned stopped all Zerg activity within the planet. My children continue to evolve, and yet, the Overmind has stopped its own. True, its mental and psionic faculties were at its peak, but its biological, its physical evolution had stopped entirely and left it in its current state. To be left with a body that could get it killed if they were under attack would spell doom to the whole swarm. That could never happen. A fierce determination to find a better body now drove the Overmind into action. The question now was, what could handle its immense psionic powers? Currently, the strains the swarm contained had nothing that would be able to hold any of its powers. It was no use in even thinking about the Protoss. The Overmind's eye swiveled up to the visible stars surrounding the planet and thought for a moment. The galaxy still had plenty of secrets to reveal to the Overmind. Overlords instantly received telepathic commands and loaded up as many drones within their hollow bodies. A moment later, a warp rift, used for speedy space travel, opened above the swarm and instantly sucked up the floating overlords. 10 years later, November 2499, Chao Sera, Terran colony. The Sons of Korhal, a rebel movement against the current Terran Confederacy, did not know what to suspect when they landed on Chao Sera. They certainly weren't suspecting to be ambushed by an alien race, hell-bent on having their guts for supper. Thankfully, they were able to create a forward base on the fringe world before the ambush struck them. Marines and firebats piled into bunkers to stave off the never-ending waves of these xenomorphs. Shell casings and tank canisters hit the soil as a new wave of Zerglings, not that the Terrans knew that yet, rushed the base. The soldiers weren't going to run out of ammo soon, and neither were the firebats. The men, however, were feeling the drain from the continuous battle. Deaths were happening because of fatigue and not because of lack of munitions. Sarah Kerrigan was also feeling the drain from the day's battle as she quickly reloaded her C-10 canister rifle to quickly put a bullet between a hydralisk's, not that the Terrans knew that yet, eyes. Quickly panning the scope of her rifle, Kerrigan took out a few more Zerglings and was about to take out a straggling hydralisk when a sudden silence engulfed the battlefield. The Zerg had suddenly stopped its unrelenting attack. What the hell? A Marine whispered as he stepped out of his barracks along with the rest of the four-man group. The rest of the base did the same, slowly stepping out of their defenses and collecting their dead while the Zerg stood frozen in the middle of the clearing. Witness despair. The momentary peace was shattered when a living storm descended upon the Terran base. Lances of lightning from the cloudless sky struck countless marines and worse, firebats. This caused a domino-like effect as the gas tanks exploded and took out more soldiers with them along with a few bunkers and missile turrets. The whole base was plunged into chaos as the swarm woke up and started slaughtering everyone in the base. Sarah was shocked still as everyone around her was killed, but no alien came to take her life. What's this? A Terran with psionic powers. Slowly, the ghost operative turned to the voice. The voice that wiped out more than half of her forces, the voice that flowed with power, the voice that just exuded a feeling of evil that made Sarah's skin cold and spine tingle. She turned around and expected the biggest, meanest and ugliest alien she would ever see for the rest of her life. Surprised are you, ghost? Yes, the surprise was clearly on her face as she looked at the monstrosity. The blue-eyed, spiky-haired blonde monstrosity that stood just as tall as her and wore a grin that split his face in two, showcasing his sharp fangs to the whole world. 3 slits on each cheek slowly opened and closed, in time with his breathing. Closer inspection revealed that his eyes would glow an ominous red when not under any direct light. The Terran teenager wore a bloody brown, long-sleeved jacket with matching brown pants and boots. His purple undershirt was unsurprisingly covered with blood and was riddled with bullet holes. Kerrigan couldn't comprehend what she saw in front of her. Was she hallucinating or perhaps poisoned? She instinctively stepped back as the boy stepped forward and she raised her rifle high and shoved the barrel at his Adam's apple, eliciting a chuckle from him. He raised his hands in a surrender-like manner, showing he was not armed or meant any harm. His smile widened as he spoke again. Careful with that rifle, I'm an unarmed civilian. Bullshit. Just because you don't have a gun does not mean you are any less dangerous. I know it was you that summoned that storm. Move and I'll shoot. The redhead didn't know where that anger came from, but it helped her steady her aim and strengthen her resolve to fight. She loaded a round into the chamber of her rifle to make the threat real. The boy's smile actually faltered for a moment before returning full force. He exploded into laughter as his eyes held her gaze. The strange boy closed his eyes and lowered his hands. He stopped laughing the moment his blue-red eyes snapped open. You may think that you have control over the situation, but you forget where you are Terran. Hot and foul-smelling air blew at the back of Sarah's neck, and only then did she remember the ongoing battle that was happening around her. She quickly turned to find a hydralisk bearing down on her, the scythe-like arms of the alien raised overhead to strike her down. Zerglings had circled the pair and were snarling menacingly at the female ghost. The base around them was nowhere to be seen. No other being was there except for Sarah Kerrigan, the strange boy and the Zerg. A wave of despair washed over her as she dropped to her knees, her rifle clattering to the ground already forgotten. A surprisingly soft hand fell on her head, ruffling her fiery locks like she was a child. Remember this feeling, Sarah? The boy smiled down at her with eyes glowing red with malice. I have a feeling that we will meet each other again on the battlefield. He placed his right index finger and middle finger on her forehead and actually winked at her. He turned on his heel and walked out of the obliterated Terran base, stepping over bodies along the way. The Zerg followed the boy out of the base, surprisingly docile now that the fighting was over. As soon as the army of aliens disappeared beyond the horizon, Sarah dropped face first on the soil, her consciousness already abandoning her. Char. The Overmind hummed in contentment as the first field test of its new body proved to be a success. The influx of psionic power coursing through the minuscule Terran Zerg hybrid did not even damage it in any way. The only drawback the Overmind could observe was that the body seemed to carry trace elements of the so-called emotions Terrans were so fond of flaunting. It actually helped in blending in when it might need to infiltrate a Terran colony, but it might hinder the Overmind's mental faculties if and when the body would be swept with Terran emotions such as anger or perhaps lust. It blinked its colossal eye to refocus on evacuating its new body off of Chao Sarah, sensing that the blasted Protoss were aware of Zerg presence on the planet. The Overmind was confident with the abilities of its new vessel, yet the Protoss were always an unknown factor during a war. Better not to risk prematurely destroying its new and superior vessel. Hyperion battlecruiser, approximately 1 Terran month after Chao Sarah's purification. Inside the medical bay of the Hyperion, sitting on her bed, was Sarah Kerrigan. A month had already come and gone since the failed rebellion turned survival mission on Chowsera, and things were only getting worse for the sons of Korhal's second in command. Since then, reports from all over the system kept repeating the same news from different planets. The Zerg, as they liked to be called, had invaded and infested nearly a dozen other planets. Terran colonies were either on high alert, or destroyed. The Confederacy had deployed all of their soldiers to reinforce or try to retake the fallen colonies. The only problem with retaking anything from the Zerg was trying to swiftly deal with their overwhelming numbers. By now everyone in the Koprulu sector knew that the Zerg won by sheer number and brutality. Even with the liberal use of nuclear warheads had no effect in whittling down their numbers, forget about even trying to attack the main hive. Sarah sighed to herself as she fastened the boots to her hostile environment suit, giving a beep to signify that everything was properly on. She gave it a quick test and was satisfied when everything disappeared when she had turned on her cloak. "I'll never get tired of seeing that," said Jim Raynor as he entered the wing inside his own customized marine suit, rifle resting on his shoulder. The redhead smiled at her new friend and comrade as she stood up from her bed, grabbing her own rifle from the bedside. "So how've you been, Sarah? The last time I saw you, you were being transported in a medevac up to space." "Yeah, well, those Zerg have some nasty poisons in them. I was lucky enough to get treatment before it had spread." She unconsciously rubbed at her right arm, the place where the hydralisk spine had grazed her. Even though it hadn't directly hit her, the spine was coated with a debilitating neurotoxin that left her weak. Luckily she was sent back to the Hyperion before anything else had happened. That was a week ago. But damn if it didn't hurt. "I hate needles." The last part was said in a whisper, but Jim heard it as well. Choosing not to point that out, for fear of getting hurt or worse, he accompanied the ghost up to the bridge of the battlecruiser where Arcturus Mensk, their commander, was waiting for them. "I still can't believe that we lost Antigua Prime to the Zerg. I still can't believe that Arcturus used those damn psi emitters to lure them to the planet in the first place," exclaimed Sarah as her grip on her rifle tightened. She was against using the emitters in the first place, but their commander had not listened to her demands. The ghost operative was angrier about the fact that Mensk would use it in the first place. If the commander of the rebellion would have used it once, then there was a higher chance of him using it again in the future. They stopped walking as they reached the doors to the bridge where they would be briefed for their next campaign. "I have a bad feeling about this." Tarsinus, Terran capital. In one of the world's public libraries stood the Overmind, in his Zerg, browsing the building's many books and holovids in archive. He was currently on an infiltration mission on their next targeted planet. He had a book in hand, classified as an epic if he remembered correctly, titled The Tale of the Utterly Gutsy Ninja. It had no relevant information in it, but was interesting nonetheless. "These Terrans have such vivid imaginations," said the Overman to no one as he put down the book and walked towards the electronic section of the library where the more important archives were stored. A guardsman stopped him from entering with an outstretched hand before pointing towards a console that was built into the wall. "Sorry kid, ya have to log in before going in." The father to the most dangerous species in the galaxy pondered whether to blow up the Terran's head for even thinking of ordering the entity around. He complied, however, as not to blow his cover and quickly made his way towards the computer. It was asking his name and a scan of his fingerprints so that he could enter the main archives. The fingerprints were easy to bypass since he had none, but he didn't have a name though. With an uncharacteristic shrug, he punched in the first name that came to mind and entered the more high-tech wing of the building. The guardsman looked back to the team before approaching the console, reading the name typed into it. "That's a weird name." The guard turned around as the front door pinged in a new guest. The blonde looked around the half-empty building before entering herself. She quickly made her way towards the console and typed in her name, Nova Terra, before entering the archives. With hands in her pockets, Nova sat before the unoccupied console right next to a fellow blonde that was reading history articles. She smiled at the boy, happy that someone from the younger generation was taking their schoolwork seriously. Deciding to make a new friend, she leaned in closer to the boy. "Homework?" she asked with a smile on her face as the boy turned to look at her. He gave back a shy one as he scratched at his scarred cheek. No, actually, I just love to read. His voice was soft and a bit raspy, as if he wasn't used to speaking. He stopped scratching his cheek and extended his hand towards Nova in a friendly gesture. Naruto, was all he said before the girl took the offered arm and shook. Nova Terra. The two continued talking for hours as they shared their views on everything that was happening. They talked about the Terran Confederacy, the ongoing rebellion, and the alien races. Naruto's views on the alien races were strange and new to Nova as he furiously slandered the highly advanced Protoss and spoke in reverence when talking about the Zerg swarm. Unfortunately for Terra, they were asked to leave the library and the pleasant, albeit serious, talk she was having with Naruto had to come to an end. Both of them walked out of library together, stopping at the end of the street. "This is my stop, I'm gonna get picked up by a friend here soon." She sat on the sidewalk, Naruto following her example. Nova gave him a questioning look which he answered, "I'll keep you company till your friends gets here. You don't mind?" She shook her head, happy that she would still be able to talk to her newest friend. Nova, on multiple points in their conversation, asked where Naruto came from, but he was always vague in his answers. "Oh come on Naruto. Can't you tell me where you live? How about where you were born? Where you go to school, anything?" Naruto laughed at her exasperated expression. He was about to give her a hint when a car pulled beside them. An all too familiar redhead stepped out of the car, not wearing her suit but instead a black long-sleeved, turtleneck shirt and jeans. Nova was about to introduce Kerrigan to her new friend and potential rebel, but Naruto had already disappeared into the night. As soon as the car was out of sight, Naruto reappeared from the nearby alleyway. His eyes were glowing red with power as he tracked both ghost operatives through their unique psionic signatures. They stopped in front of an old and abandoned warehouse which Naruto knew to be housing a shuttle that would take them back up to the rebellion fleet just out of range from Tarsinus. Thanks to a little mind reading, Naruto, the overman, knew of their plans. It actually coincided with his own plans of invading and conquering this planet, so there was no harm in letting them use their Terran toys. Be it by the Terrans or my own hands, Tarsinus will crumble before the might of the Zerg swarm. Fall of Tarsinus, New Gettysburg. This is Kerrigan, we've neutralized the Protoss but there's a wave of Zerg incoming. We need immediate evac. The communications system crackled with interference as the Hyperion hung lazily above orbit. Arcturus Mensk gazed out of his viewport as he listened to the ticking of his silver-plated pocket watch. Snapping it close, he raised his voice so that he could be heard over the sounds of battle happening on the surface of the planet. "Belay that order. We're moving out." Arcturus turned to leave, but the voice of Jim Raynor stopped him. "What? You're not just gonna leave them? We still have men down there. Sarah is still down there. All ships prepare to move away from Tarsinus on my mark," continued the commander of the rebellion, who acted as if he didn't even hear the last two transmissions. Back on the surface, things were looking dire as the rebels were in disarray. No new orders were coming in and there seemed to be no ships coming to evacuate them. A wave of Zerglings rushed the base, but Sarah quickly eliminated 3. She left the rest to the Marines and Firebats as she dodged a hail of spines from an approaching Hydralisk. She ordered one of the remaining ghosts to deal with it as she lifted up her rifle to shoot down a Mutalisk. Her bullet tore off its right wing and it came crashing down, right on top of the Hydralisk and ghost that were facing off. Not having time to mourn for a fallen comrade, she broke her cover for the abandoned bunker just a few hundred yards away from her spot. Her progress was halted when a Hydralisk came rushing straight through the wall beside her. Kerrigan quickly raised her canister rifle to unload all the bullets she had left on the hulking behemoth. The Hydralisk screamed in pain as it fell to the ground, dead. Guys, about that evac I was talking about. Damn it, Arcturus, don't do tea. It's done, helmsman, signal the fleet and take us out of orbit, now." With a smile on his face, Arcturus left the bridge of the Hyperion to rest in his personal quarters. He gave himself a pat on the back as this day would see the fall of the corrupt Confederacy once and for all. The radio crackled to life again, Kerrigan's voice drifting through the eerily quiet battlecruiser. "Commander. Jim, what the hell is going on up there? A Zergling's cry echoed throughout the battlefield as a new wave of Zerglings, Hydralisks and even a few Ultralisks ran for the helpless Terran base. Sarah brought down her visor and saw an endless wave of heat signatures coming right at them. Sarah looked down, not even able to notice that she had dropped her rifle on the ground. She took off the visor and headphones, feeling the minuscule weight surprisingly heavy at the moment. A familiar feeling crept up on her as she saw the Marines fall under the unstoppable wave of death that approached her. She looked up, seeing the fleeing image of their armada disappearing into warp space. Those good-for-nothing bastards, rage enveloped the female Terran as she withdrew her sidearm along with a handful of throwing knives. With the pistol, she brought down a dozen Zerglings with headshots and unloaded all 4 of her knives into a Hydralisk's head. She threw her empty pistol at another Hydralisk, but it only bounced off of its armored hide. The creature looked down at the piece of metal before looking back at the female Terran. If it weren't a life-and-death situation, Sarah would have thought that the Hydralisk raised a non-existent eyebrow at her. Well, what are you waiting for, you fucking monsters? Hurry up and kill me. She opened her arms, inviting them to attack her and throwing insults at them to provoke an attack. The Zerg responded by parting down the middle, revealing a blonde-haired man walking towards them. He had a pleasant smile on his face, the slits on his cheeks flaring making them look deeper. His eyes were glowing red with power and his hands were now claws instead of their usual Terran appearance. Naruto stopped 10 feet away from the enraged ghost. Hello again, Sarah Kerrigan, how are you this fine day? He stepped closer and left the safety of the Zerg behind him. Naruto looked around Sarah, over the swarm and into the burning buildings of New Gettysburg. You are all that is left, yes. She didn't answer him, not even looking him in the eye. Where are your friends, Sarah? Did they leave you, abandon you here? Shut up. Her burst of anger created a ripple of psionic energy around her, cracking the ground beneath her feet. She finally looked at him, straight in the eyes as she asked him, why? Not needing an elaboration of the question, Naruto began his explanation. You are a child of prophecy, my girl, one that ties you with all of the species in the universe. Zerg, Protoss and Terran, you will decide their fate. You are the key to the survival and the continuation of these races, or its extinction. Killing you would kill everyone, simple as that. So it was foretold, so it would come to pass. He raised his right hand to her, palm open up towards the cloudy sky. Your own race, the Terrans, have abandoned you. The Protoss do not care about you. And the Zerg do. What about them? She asked through clenched teeth, hating to be reminded that she was left for dead on this forsaken planet. The blonde looked at her for a while, his eyes losing its menacing glow and his claws receding into his flesh. He smiled kindly at her, so out of place in the current situation. The Zerg swarm would like to offer you our friendship, our home. The Zerg would like to offer you power, offer you control, offer you revenge. He lifted up his hand again, offering it to the redhead. Her eyes held unshed tears from her abandonment, but that soon disappeared to be replaced by hatred and the need for vengeance, the need to make those backstabbing traitors pay. A new goal set before her. She took off her gloves and accepted the outstretched appendage, feeling a chill run up her spine when their skin made contact with one another. She looked at her hand, noticing the purple creep growing on the appendage. A wise choice, Sarah Kerrigan, soon you will be a goddess amongst these filth. I shall see to it. The creep was quickly making its way all over her body, covering her in a cocoon-like layer of the biomass. Before her face was covered, she asked the one question she was never able to ask on Chao Sarah. What are you? Naruto released his grip on Sarah and commanded one of the nearby overlords to pick her up. She would soon be on her way to Char, his home planet. I am the will of the Zerg given form. Everything that the swarm is, lies within me. I am their father, their leader, their overment. The others made their way back towards their respective hives, preparing to fully infest the new planet. A massive slug-like Zerg stayed behind, its non-existent eyes looking at the overman's human form. Naruto turned to look at the creature, identifying it as the Cerebrate Zosh. He beckoned the Zerg to follow as he made his way towards the nearest hive cluster. You may ask, Zosh, what is on your mind? Father, Was it the proper decision in assimilating her into the swarm? A being with such psionic powers will not submit to the will of the Zerg so easily. She may become a threat to our people. The Overmind hummed in thought before answering his eldest child. Fear not, the Overmind answered, it is not my intention to control her Zosh. I meant what I said when I offered her power and control. In turn, she will give us her loyalty and her skills. A being such as her was never meant to be controlled, after all. Grabbing the tentacle of a passing overlord, Naruto was hoisted up into the air and into the hollow body of the overlord. Believe in my decision, my child. This will be one step closer to our goals. One step closer for perfection. The overlord approached Kerrigan's own and using his tremendous psionic powers, Naruto opened up a small wormhole above them, instantly sending them back to Char. I believe in you, my master. Tarsinus, with Raynor and Nova. The medevacs touched down a mile outside of New Gettysburg, unloading a dozen Marines and 2 siege tanks from their holds. Jim Raynor rode off the ship on his Vulture while Nova offered air support on a Wraith. The ex-marshal looked towards the infested city and couldn't help but cringe when he saw the heavy Zerg presence still within. He looked back towards his men and gave them a curt nod, scouting ahead of them just in case. Nova was right behind him, weapons system fully armed and ready to rain hell on anything blocking her way. We'll save you, Sarah, thought the blonde ghost as she kept an eye on her radar for any approaching hostiles. Just hold on. Char, 6 months later. People would think that with tens of trillions of inhabitants, the planet would be filled to the brim. Surprisingly, the planet was very spacious as the Zerg hid within the hives or underground, within the tunnel network built by the Nidus canals. Still, the planet was always active, always alive. The creep pulsed with energy as it continuously secreted spores to nourish the swarm. Drones scoured the land for hidden minerals and Vespine geysers, Zerglings and Hydralisks patrolled the land while overlords kept a watchful eye on its kin. Naruto, the Overmind's Terran body, kept a watchful eye on the chrysalis that contained the ghost, Kerrigan. Her rebirth was a long process since the Zerg Overmind sensed Kerrigan's formidable psionic powers from the very beginning and desired to adapt the Terran into the swarm. Bringing all of the evolutionary strength of its genetic skill to bear upon the one-time ghost, the Overmind transformed Sarah Kerrigan into an unstoppable combination of psychic ability and biological deadliness. Soon enough she would emerge from her cocoon and re-enter the world a stronger and more superior creature. Looking into his closed fist, Naruto looked at the small device that was extracted from Kerrigan's brain. Once in a while, a red light would flash from it and would send out a signal to who knows where. Unfortunately for whoever planted the device, no signal of any kind would escape from within the living walls of the Overmind's main body. With but a thought, the device combusted and quickly burned from the heat of the psionic flames. A drone floated by the chrysalis, prodding the sack with its pincers before floating off again. Naruto sighed, the human elements of its body telling the Overmind that it was bored and needed activity. It ignored the curious urge to poke the chrysalis with something sharp as it lurched forward. Naruto's eyes widened as wing-like appendages pierced through the membrane from within and tore it up. Green, amniotic fluid flooded the small chamber as Kerrigan stepped out of the deflated chrysalis. Eyes glowing orange with power as she surveyed her surroundings, Sarah flexed her hands as well as her wings. She looked radically different now. Her body was covered in purple flesh. Vital spots were covered with thick carapace armor. 2 winged appendages were attached to her back, each wing containing 3 long and very sharp sickles. Her red hair was replaced with thick, dreadlock-like appendages that acted as extra sensory limbs. The armor at the bottom of each foot was spiked, making her look like she was wearing high heels. How do you feel? The Overmind asked as the former ghost's eyes stopped to look at him. She gave a fanged smile as she threw a psionic blast at the wall, shredding it to pieces as well as scattering the Zerg that was on the other side. Naruto looked at the damage and gave Sarah a disapproving glare. I've never felt so powerful in my entire life. My mind is so clear right now. With the excitement gone and the rush of power slowly disappearing, her Zerg appearance slowly melted away, revealing tanned human flesh and flowing red hair. Her eyes lost the glow they held and returned to its former vibrant green. She gasped as she witnessed the armor disappear under her skin and her talons shrink into Terran-like nails. What happened? I thought that I would look like. She turned to look at Naruto, who was looking at her with a bemused look. This is a form of adaptation, the Overmind explained without prompting. When you are not in danger, your battle state will disappear, leaving you looking like your former self. With practice and a little imagination, you may transform specific body parts into its deadlier forms. Sarah quickly covered her modesty as a light blush was visible on her cheeks. She tried to cover her face with her long hair. "What are you doing?" asked the Overmind curiously, finding the display strange. Was it a Terran thing perhaps? Suddenly remembering that the Terrans needed clothing, Naruto picked up Sarah's old hostile environment suit from the floor and tossed it to her. "Meet me outside, beside the Nidus Canal. We have much to discuss." As soon as Sarah stepped out of the Overmind's first body, she was assaulted by Char's unforgiving heat as well as the sounds of the Zerg screeching and roaring all around her. What surprised her most was that she could actually understand what they were saying. Their voices held an echo-like quality to them. They were roaring at each other, yes, but telepathically they spoke in a language she never heard of and thanked her new genetic makeup for helping her understand. "Have you heard about the new armor upgrade? Whoa, watch where you're flying, ya moron. I wanna evolve into a hatchery. Gather, return to base, gather, return to base, gather, return to base, gather, gather, damn it." And I was like, this is my burrow spot. I just want to give everyone a great, big hug. But I only have Kaiser blades for arms. Zerglings ran beside and around her, like what stray dogs would do. They would spout nonsensical things at her before running off to find something else to do. Hydralisks would throw a nod her way, and from time to time, an Ultralisk would try to hug her. She finally reached the Nidus Canal and saw Naruto rubbing the belly of a Zergling. "You expected something different, yes?" Sarah answered with a nod, getting the feeling that the Overmind would see it. She stopped beside him looking at the Zergling before answering his question. "I didn't expect the Zerg to be so normal. I always thought that they were nothing more than savage beasts. No offense." She bent down beside him, scratching the belly of the deadly alien herself. The Zergling chirped in agreement, kicking its hind legs in joy, tongue lolling out of its mouth. Sarah laughed at the silly thing. What alien is this anyway? I've never seen anything like it in the universal bestiary before. The Zergling was based off of another creature, from another planet. The Zerg, my dear, is an amalgamation of multiple species that were assimilated into the swarm. I just supercharged some genetic traits to make them the deadliest and most efficient creatures in the known universe. If you want to see what we originally looked like, here, Naruto grabbed something behind him and presented it to the former ghost. It was a larva. All of us came from these little geniuses. From the drones to the mighty Ultralisk, even my original form was from them. They contain all genetic strains of the Zerg swarm. They are the most important member in our family. Why haven't you assimilated humans into the swarm then? Asked Sarah as she glanced around her. I have yet to see any supercharged Terrans running around. The Overmind laughed at the question as it still plagued him to this day. Honestly, my dear, your race is the most genetically complex beings that I have had the pleasure of encountering. Even the tiniest outside influence could alter your DNA, and therefore, I cannot create a base strain from your former race. This body I have is the product of millions of assimilated Terrans from the Sarah systems. I spent a decade trying to create the perfect hybrid vessel for myself. Even this form is not yet to my liking. The Overmind in human form stood up and beckoned Sarah to follow him. She did so without question. A few yards away from their spot were the entrance to the underground network, a Nidus Canal. Naruto placed a foot on the mouth of the structure and offered his hand to the young Zerg hybrid. Breathe in deep. Traveling through the Nidus underground network for the first time is not a pleasant experience. Unknown location. Stolen Hyperion battlecruiser. Rainer's Raiders. Nova Terra. Former Dominion ghost now turned rebel sat at one of the bar stools in the cantina of the ship. A few bottles of alcohol lay before her with the seventh in her hand. She was wearing her civvies as the crew had no standing orders as of yet. Nova's eyes were already bloodshot and she knew the room wasn't supposed to spin, but still she brought the bottle to her lips and downed the contents in one breath. She signaled the barman for another bottle as she heard someone take the seat next to her. She let out a depressed sigh as she looked at James Rayner, looking as bad as she did. "Hey there, Jimmy, you look like shit." She heard him laugh at her brashness, but the alcohol had already done what it was meant to do and numbed how she felt. Even though it had been almost a year since Sarah's disappearance, Nova refused to accept that she was dead, and at least half a year since they defected from the new Terran Dominion. Nova still felt like a lowlife in not being able to find her sister in arms when they had went against orders and landed on Tarsinus to try and save her. Jim felt the same as the ghost but buried his grief under his new role as the commander of the rebellion against Arcturus tyranny. He signaled for a bottle of his own from the bar. She's not dead, Jim." Nova said this in barely a whisper, but the statement still caught Jim's attention. "I don't know how, but I know that she's still alive. Somewhere. Sarah is still alive." The conviction in her claim shocked the man beside her. Was it just the alcohol talking, or did she really believe it? Jim looked at the ghost and found her looking at him. Her eyes were red, but they were clear from the haze of being drunk, and they held a fire in them that still burned brightly. "Mark my words, Jim. I'm going to find her." Feeling a bout of determination, Jim placed his bottle down and agreed happily with Nova. The momentary peace was shattered when an engineer tumbled into the cantina. He was gulping for air and his brow was slick with sweat. The unnamed worker quickly scanned the bar before locking eyes with his commanding officer. "Commander Rayner." His shout caught the attention of everyone. All eyes turned to look at the man, but said worker didn't even pay them any attention as he approached the closest hollow screen. "You ain't gonna believe this." He switched it to the new network where it was showing live action footage of a Zerg invasion. Jim thought nothing much about it until a humanoid figure stepped into the camera's line of sight. The Terran Zerg hybrid smiled at the camera before giving it a wink. The monitor's audio picked up a wet, squelching sound from off-screen, and a few seconds later, the camera dropped to the ground and revealed that the cameraman had lost his head. The cantina was silent as footfalls could be heard through the din of the ongoing invasion. The camera shook for a split second before being raised off of the ground. "Sorry for that, but I don't take prisoners." The camera panned to show the familiar face of Sarah Kerrigan in her infested state. Her eyes were glowing with malice as she sneered at the camera. "Prepare yourselves, Terrans, there's a new queen bitch in the universe." The camera went dead, showing nothing but static across the entire Koprulu sector. Nova was silent along with the rest of the people inside the cantina, still looking at the blank hollow screen. Jim turned off the monitor and looked at all of his soldiers. Prepare for battle. Moria. The bar scene, as the Terrans liked to call it, was not something Naruto enjoyed. There were tons of reasons why he didn't like places that served alcohol and crammed Terrans into small, claustrophobia-inducing spaces. Everyone was too loud, too violent, and too fucking close. It took Sarah's calming presence as well as his millennia-long experience of micromanaging the Zerg swarm from across the universe to stem his rage and quell the urge to grab his bottle of something and shove it down the throat of the Terran behind him. The Overmind actually felt a sense of accomplishment in that thought. He felt a hand on his own and looked up to Sarah's green eyes. "Are you all right?" was all she said as she took the bottle away from his grip. The bottle was severely cracked and leaked fluids. The Queen of Blades placed the bottle on the counter, letting the bartender take it away without question. The bar was frequented with soldiers from the nearby base, so a broken bottle was the least of their worries. "Honestly, my dear," started Naruto while using his Terran voice, "I hope these were the places you avoided when you were on their side. A lady such as you should not associate with such." A nearby Marine let out a roaring belch as he passed the couple by. "Scum." Kerrigan laughed at his expressions as she took a sip from her own bottle. She didn't really mind going to places such as these. Hanging out with Rayner and Nova, who was a bit of a tomboy, desensitized her to such locations and later found that she enjoyed herself in bars. "Oh come on, Dad. This place isn't so bad. Plus you were the one who said that I could pick the place to meet with the Cerebrates." The overman wanted to argue with his youngest, but one of the waitresses approached and informed them that a private booth was now available for their use. They didn't have to wait long as the Cerebrates, in human form, entered the bar. Their mere presence silenced the building as they ogled at how beautiful the three women were. To the left side was a petite woman with fair skin, gray eyes and raven-colored hair styled in a pixie cut. She wore dark jeans, stiletto heels and a sleeveless turtleneck shirt. She was the shortest in the group and was of Asian descent. This woman was Zosh, leader of the Garm brood and the smartest of the Cerebrates. To the right was the second tallest of the trio. She had long, platinum blonde hair and a pale complexion. She wore a black sundress that contrasted with her pale skin and red eyes. She was a Yuza, leader of the Incubus brood and the most bloodthirsty of Cerebrates. The woman at the center was the tallest of them all and was even taller than some of the Marines in the bar. She stood out the most with her height, her exotic tanned skin and golden eyes. Her attributes were no laughing matter either, as every male creature in the bar was openly looking at her large assets. Her pink hair reached the middle of her back and had no style to it. She wore a tan trench coat over a black turtleneck dress. Her long legs were defined by the heeled boots she wore. The goddess was named Tiamat, leader to her own brood and the right hand of the overman. The crowd parted for the three ladies as they made their way to Naruto and Sarah. Tiamat gave a respectful bow to her father, thus her example was followed by the other two. Forgive our tardiness, father, but these human bodies were difficult to move the first time. Naruto smiled and motioned for them to take a seat, which forced Sarah to move closer to Naruto. She noted that Ayuza narrowed her eyes at her actions. So as not to break their cover, they ordered a round of drinks for the table before the overman spoke to them. Welcome to Moria, my children. I have called you here for two reasons. The first is a field test for your new bodies out on the battlefield. The second is because of the mineral-rich environment this planet has. I want this planet under Zerg control by the end of the week, and I want to see the three of you fight in battle. Naruto looked at his bottle before dumping the contents on the floor. With the significant increase of resources, Abathur will be able to hasten his completion of the Leviathan. Father, Sarah spoke up. Forgive me for my arrogance, but who is this Abathur? Ayuza scoffed at the question before she spoke. Of course, such an underdeveloped brain such as yours could not even remember something as basic as whom the great Abathur is. He is our chief geneticist and the smartest of our siblings. You disrespect him by not remembering his name, filthy little. Thank you for informing your sister Ayuza. The overman stepped in before claws could be unleashed and their cover was blown. Tiamat, what have you found out about this planet? Without missing a beat, the exotic beauty spoke. Moria contains at least 4 billion Terrans. They have 16 major settlements and 86 minor settlements. The planet has only one space platform with minimal military presence. This planet is controlled by what the Terrans call the Kel-Morian Combine. Moria is their capital world. She said this without an ounce of feeling and didn't even blink. Sarah was reminded of the adjutants the Terrans used with how Tiamat spoke. But the Kel-Morians have a very militaristic culture. Interjected Zosh into the conversation. Do not be surprised that the civilians would have some form of military training. Zosh took a sip from her beer and instantly spat it out, spraying it on a passing Marine. Did I just consume Terran refuse? Ayuza, what strategies will you implement? Disable the space platform and crash it into the capital. Since it supplies energy to the other major settlements and those major settlements supply energy to the minor settlements, they would be dealt with in one stroke. We would take over the planet with minimal losses. While Zosh's voice was quiet and shy-like, Ayuza's voice was husky as if she was aroused. Sarah would ask Naruto later why they were female in the first place after they left the bar. Tiamat, any other suggestions? The strategy is sufficient, but I would like to have forces at the ready when the power is cut. Sarah. She looked at Naruto for a while before replying. I suggest that we protect our orbit. The Terran Dominion has forces to spare and we don't want the whole armada bearing down on us. Once we secure the settlements, I suggest we spawn spore cannons for each settlement. They wouldn't suspect it since they haven't encountered that kind of structure yet. Naruto was silent for a moment as he went through the scenario in his mind. A million possibilities were thought of in the span of a second and were solved in the next. This will suffice. There was a pulse of psionic energy from the group of Zerg hybrids before an alarm echoed throughout the entire city. Everyone scrambled out of the bar as an adjutant's voice blared to life. Alert! Zerg forces have destroyed the orbital space platform. Evacuation imminent. Long live the Zerg swarm. XXX. Jim Raynor didn't know what he should have expected when the raiders responded to the distress call. He didn't expect that it was the Kel-Morian Combine asking for help. He didn't expect to find Moria's orbit littered with bodies and spaceship parts. He didn't expect to not find the space platform at where it should have been. Most of all, he didn't expect giant globs of acid to assault the Hyperion from the planet's surface. When did the Zerg get orbital defense? Matt Horner, the Hyperion's captain and Raynor's second in command, exclaimed as he was sent crashing down to the Neo-Steel floor. Everybody to their stations, concentrate all power to the shields. The crew stared at awe as a glob of corrosive acid passed by their viewport. Matt turned to Raynor, wearing his armor, and ran to him. Jim, we need to get rid of those cannons if we want to stay alive. Call on your best men and we'll drop you from orbit. Get rid of them before we get killed. Raynor rushed out of the bridge with Nova and quickly enlisted 12 Marines and an SCV to help him prepare a forward base on Moria. None of them said a word as they were launched out of the ship and quickly descended on the planet. With speed and heat on their side, they cut a clean path through countless mutalisks. Raynor peeked out of the small reinforced window of his drop pod and saw what Moria looked like for the first time. The whole planet was at war. As far as the eye could see, battles were being waged. The land was covered in creep and the towering skyscrapers were getting covered in them as well. In the center of the city, where the city hall should have been, was a hive. It stood prominently over the rest of the man-made structures. Terrans and Zerg filled the streets. All of them were locked in battle. The city, overall, was severely damaged. Half of it was covered by the remains of the space platform and the other half was up in flames. Up in the buildings, Marines lined the windows with makeshift barricades to gun down passing by Guardians. Down in the streets, Zerglings were easily mowing down the Terran forces. Even the siege tank's arclight cannons couldn't handle the sheer volume of the Zerg forces. Time seemed to move in fast forward as soon as he looked away from the window. Jim thought that they had reached the ground way too quickly for his tastes, but he quickly cleared his head and ordered the SCV to work on building a command center. A sniper round found its way into the SCV pilot's head and his vehicle exploded with the second round. There was no time to panic as everyone dove behind the drop pods for cover. Well. Look what the Hydralisk dragged in. A whole lot of traitors just for Sarah. The former ghost chambered another round as she centered her sights on an unsuspecting Marine. Boom. Headshot. She laughed maniacally as she ordered 24 Zerglings to rush their position. Jim and the rest of the Marines toppled the drop pods for more cover while Nova was instructed to cloak and flank the shooter. A few close calls with a few dozen Zerglings got Nova a clear shot at their shooter, but what she saw was the last person she expected to see. XXX. The Overmind always liked the calm silence found in space. The reduced sensory stimulus helped with concentrating and he took advantage of it as he sat down on the rubbery floor that was the Overlord's stomach. His apprentice of sorts sat a few feet in front of him, also assuming a meditative position. He had taught her that this was a good way to help psychics in grasping the full potential of their abilities, and it was true, but the Overmind wasn't doing this to do that. He wasn't an amateur. What he was doing right now was quelling the thousands of minds that screamed at him from within his own. Sadly, the merging of the millions of Terrans to make a body for itself had the nasty side effect of bombarding him with memories that was not his own. But through the storm of memories, one intrigued him especially. The only annoyance was that he had to find it again. This is. No. You didn't have to. No. This is our land. No. I am your father. No. I won't lose. There. Isolate the strand. The Overmind didn't have to concentrate too hard once he found the memory again. All he had to do was latch onto it and it would be easy enough to manipulate. His surroundings melted away to reveal a lush forest filled with animals and plant life that looked quite exotic. In the field he found himself ran a stream in the middle, where it connected to a large river. The overman followed the river down to a waterfall. What stood out were the amazing statues that bordered the waterfall. 2 statues as tall as one of his ultralisks stood like sentries facing each other, clearly marking the separation of the land where the river split it. As the overman got closer to the pieces of art, he could faintly hear the sounds of a battle. 2 humans were fighting one another with powers he had never seen the likes of. The overman thought of the possibilities such powers could benefit the swarm. The memory played on even if the Zerg patriarch wasn't paying it any attention. As suspected a few seconds later, giant and fleshy sacks crashed down onto the planet. Zergs of all kinds poured out of them and used modified poison sacs in their bodies to coat the whole planet with its paralytic properties and harvest the humans for his human-like body. The overman, using his high intellect, could already think of what he could use the powers with to help better his hive and his children. Especially with the energy constructs known to the extinct shinobis as Biju. Oh yes, he could think of many things to use them for.